how do you compare the cost of nuclear and what it would provide in terms of clean energy and the stabilisation of the grid compared to renewables? Because we know, people say renewables will be the cheapest form, but they're not right now because you've got to upgrade transmission lines and you've got to put all the infrastructure in place. There was one report that we heard from Colin Boyce, and I've since seen it, that renewables will actually cost something like $1.5 trillion. So how do you compare costs?
Yeah, it's interesting because you were talking with Dai Li about the energy crisis we're suffering right now. I think Peter Dutton just announced that there will be precisely zero nuclear generation in Australia in the next 20 years. So what do we do while we wait for 20 years?
Well, gas.
Can we afford
gas
to just
is
turn
the answer in the meantime.
Oh, we're going to build new gas power plants, are we?
No. There is an impetus and an encouragement from industry and I think an acknowledgement from this government that there needs to be more gas in the system for that firming up of renewables. Do you not agree?
Yeah, but Peter Dutton's predecessor, Scott Morrison, actually said to industry about 5 years ago, you must build a new gas-fired power plant or we will do it. And when industry all stepped back and said, feel free, you go and do it, Scott Morrison then commissioned the Kurri Kurri plant to be built by Snowy Hydro. That price he proposed was $600 million. It's now $1.5 billion, and it's yet to be operational.
And renewables in the trillions, do you agree with that?
That's just ludicrous.
Right.
How many thousands of gigawatts do they propose we're going to get for $1.5 trillion? That's like you cited the AEMO CSIRO cost gen report. That would not actually, we would need to literally expand capacity by about 1,000 or 10,000%. Like that's just a ludicrous number.
Tim, would you agree though that a lot of this stuff doesn't add up? It simply doesn't add up from what the government is proposing and what the opposition is proposing as well. And you just got to look at the numbers. I mean, the government emission reduction target, well, I think it will probably get there. For 42 or 43%, it doesn't really matter by 2030. But then you look at the renewable energy target, and that is about half of the 82%. So there's a big gap there, and who pays for it in the meantime? We do, because that pushes up the cost of power, because there are big energy gaps, aren't there?
Laura, with respect, what Peter Dutton has announced is a one-page press release after a year of study with no facts. What AEMO does is puts out 100-page reports that are peer-reviewed by thousands of energy experts, and then they update them every 6 to 12 months, and they've been doing that for decades. And it's all backed by modelling that the IEA, the International Energy Agency, uses. So I think we can compare a one-page flyer with hundreds of pages of detailed, independent financial analysis.
I'm talking about the comparisons between the government's plan and the opposition's plan, and saying that there are gaps in both. Perhaps the gaps, and Peter Dutton's in opposition, he's not in government, so perhaps those gaps will be filled closer to the election. But just on the government's plan as well, I mean, energy doesn't look like it's coming down anytime soon thanks to renewables, does it?
Well, I respectfully disagree. What we had was 9 years of Dutton's party in government, and what we had was an absolute freeze on investment because we had this climate war that Peter Dutton's trying to bring in again. So to blame the Albanese government for inheriting, let's remember in 2022, we had a week of the electricity market failing. That was 3 months after the Albanese government was elected. That was a direct result of Angus Taylor's inability to actually approve any new capacity while he was energy minister.
But what bothers me a little bit, Tim, is what about the 10 to 20% that is not going to be covered by renewables?
Laura,
what picks up the slack there in 20 years' time?
What we need to do is actually move towards the 82% this decade and then worry about the last 18% next decade. Well, you roll your eyes. We're actually seeing...
Sorry, it wasn't rolling my eyes. Just winced just a tiny bit because I think that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.
The world's building, doubling its battery manufacturing capacity every 18 months right now. The IEA has just upgraded its battery manufacturing capacity by 1,000% last year by 2030. So we will be able to use batteries, we'll be able to use offshore wind. You mentioned gas peakers, they will play a role, absolutely. But remember, gas is 4% of generation in the electricity grid today. So that 4%
Price
will
setter,
still
though,
be
isn't it?
around. Sorry?
It's a price setter in the market, though, isn't it?
Correct. So what we need to do is actually have gas available for domestic consumption. In the East Coast, we produce 5 times more gas than we use domestically. What we have is the gas being exported, and so the gas cartel then extorts international price parity on domestic consumers using our own gas. And so we pay above market prices, export price parity. What we need to do is take control and rebuild the grid, because we have coal-fired power plants that represent 65, 70% of the generation, and they were built 50 years ago. They are predictably going to have to be replaced in the next decade. We can't wait 20 years because they will simply break, as we saw 2 years ago. 1/3 of the Australian coal fleet was offline at the same time in 2022. We need to build new capacity today. AEMO has 260,000 megawatts of battery, wind and solar proposals in the investor queue right now today. Yesterday, we saw a $4 billion wind farm built, announced by foreign investors in Victoria by TAG Energy. The investors are queuing up ready to build projects today. But what Peter Dutton is proposing is to freeze out private investment and to fund $100 billion of public investment that will take 20 years to build.
Well, Tim, let's have this conversation ongoing. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much for today.
Thanks very much, Laura.